Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Shvis Perek Tes Halacha Aleph. We're learning today Daf Ayin Aleph. We left off on Daf Ayin Aleph Amad Aleph Mamish on the top. We are dedicating this class for all of the Yidden that live in Eretz Yisrael and for the success of the IDF. And may they have this Hatzlacha today. Amen. So let's go like this, Chavre. Rabbi Yechanan gave two halachic Piskei Din. He gave two halachic rulings. One is that he paskined like the Rabbanon, the Hache, that say that mustard is prohibited on Shvis. The Chachamim over here are Machmir. Unlike Rabbi Yehuda that said that Svichim, that mustard is mutter, the Chachamim say that all of the Svichim are asr, which means mustard. And the Rabbi Yechanan also paskined like the Rabbanon in Masechtas Beitza, as we explained, the Rabbanon are lenient. They hold that Beis Hillel will hold that if you have Shabbos Yom Tov, one after the other, an egg that's born on Shabbos or on Yom Tov is prohibited. Let's just use the words noilad, mishum noilad. The Rabbanan hold that on the next day, even if the next day is Shabbos or Yom Tov, it's going to be permitted. And the way we understand the reason behind the Chachamim, let's just use the words, is because they hold that it's shtei kedushos, and therefore noilad on one way doesn't create a isur of noilad for a day which has another kedusha. Okay, we also learned, and now I have let's just clarify something that I just hopped after we had the shir yesterday, that Rabbi Yechanan lived in Sipoidim. He began in Sipoidim. The Gemara in Yerushalmi is telling us, why did he move to Tiberia? He moved to Tiberia because the judge, who was older than Rabbi Yechanan in Sipari, in these two dinim, paskined the opposite in both cases. He paskined like Rabbi Yehuda. That means when it comes to the dinim of svichim, of mustard, he held that we can be lenient. And in reverse, when it comes to the din of Abeya, which came into the world either on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, and the next day is Shabbos or Yom Tov, he paskins like the Rabbanon, like Rabbi Yehuda, always like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda hold that it's Kedusha Achas, and therefore, according to Beis Hillel, as it is prohibited on the day that it's born, it's also asur on the next day because it's one Kedush. Which is quite amazing for Rabbi Yechanan Poshet moved from Seipori to Tiveria, and now you know why. He was the youngster. The elder Dayan, the Gemara is going to begin today's daf by clarifying who that Dayan was. Paskind. He paskin like Rabbanan. The other Dayan paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. He felt that he can't be there. It's amazing. And we're going to see even more, something more painful, that the Talmud of Rabbi Yechanan, when it comes to some of these dinim, sided with the judge and not with this teacher, Rabbi Yechanan. First of all, when it comes to mustard, we already learned yesterday that Reish Lakish also held that svichim of mustard is mutter. If you remember, he saw people, they dropped mustard, they didn't even bother to pick it up. So it wasn't just his teacher against the judge. There were others on the side of the judge. And actually, like we said yesterday, that we're going to get a lot more into the sugya of muktzah. We'll see how this is relevant. And just to make it clear, Chevra, that muktzah, the opposite of muktzah is mukhan. Muktzah means set aside in the negative way. It was set aside for it not to be used, which is why you can't use it on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, where we have the dinam of muktzah. Now, really, there are two ways of understanding muktzah, which will be extremely important to chap today's daf. Number one is it's a rule on the person, on the gavra, that if the person set aside something for it not to be used, just as an example, if you have a keli that's normally used, keli shemalachta le'iser, but there's a chesron kiss. You have what you call today your smartphone. People don't like using it for anything other than the usage of the phone. They're not going to use it if their table is out of balance to put it as a, to support a table. They won't do it. So before Shabbos, you shut it off and you have in mind, I'm not using this until after Shabbos. That's why it's muktzah, because you actually set it out from it being used. Or you don't need the person to be maktzia it. The chefza itself, since the item is unavailable for it to be used Shabbos and Yom Tov, it automatically becomes muktzah. And we'll see there's a huge nafkamina whether you'll understand that it has to be set out or whether the cheftze is automatically set out, adarabba. If you want to use it, you have to be meichen it. You have to say, you have to designate it for it to be used. We're going to have three halachis when it comes to this question, to this scenario where Shabbos and Yom Tov is consecutive one day after the other. One is the din of Beitza that we're going to review quickly. The other one is going to be Shiyarei Psila. That I'll explain what that means. You have a wick, you lit a candle before Shabbos, whether that candle is going to be Muktzah and Yom Tov. Don't forget, Chavra, candles are not Muktzah and Yom Tov. You can pass a fire on Yom Tov. But on Shabbos, you can't. So the same thing, whether it's Kedusha Achas, whether it's Shtei Kedushas, we'll see that if, according to some, if you have all of the remnants of a lamp, don't forget, guys, you can't light a fire on Shabbos. And not only is the fire a problem, but the buses, the lamp itself, the candelabra is also, by Bein Hashmoshes, it's asur. And you have the rule that once something is Kivan Daktzia Bein Hashmoshes, it becomes muksa for the whole Shabbos. Question is, what happens if Yom Tov is the next day? And the third case where we're going to have this question whether Shabbos Yom Tov consecutive is one Kedusha or two Kedushas is when it comes to the dinam of Eruve Techumen. We'll speak it out when we learn the Gemara inside. So that will close up the first sugya that we'll begin the class with. And then on Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis, we're going to look at the Shita of Rab Shimon. The Shita of Rab Shimon holds that all Svichim are mutarim. He's very lenient. The only Isur Svichim is only on keruv, on cabbage. And the Gemara is going to elaborate, as we already explained it when we read the Mishnah, why Rab Shimon holds what Rab Shimon holds. We're going to have a shocking story of Rab Shimon Bar Yochai, and there's going to be a lot today. And one more thing that we're going to have on Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis, a Baraisa that will introduce something that we never learned before, and that is the following. When you have certain plants that are products halachically of the 6th year, which theoretically would mean is that you can leave them in the ground. You can even harvest them on the 7th. You're not working the ground. You're just harvesting the product. Nevertheless, for you to be allowed to leave it in the field, midrabanan, because of maras ayin, they have to be fully dried out and hard when the 7th year begins for you to be allowed to leave it in the field. But if it's not fully dried out and hard, even if halachically, it's a product of the 6th year because it's something that you go after, let's say the shlish. It grew a third or more in the 6th year. Because of maras ayin, it has to be uprooted on the 6th year, not because it's tzvichim. No, it's not tzvichim. It's a product of the 6th year. But because if it's going to be soft in the ground and someone will end up picking it on the 7th year, someone will think that it's a product of the 7th year. And we're going to see that the luf that we spoke so much about is one of the exceptions of this rule. We learned the whole time about the luf. You left the luf on the ground. And we'll see why we made exceptions to that. That's a kitzur of the whole daf today. Daf Ayin Aleph Amud Aleph all the way on the top. So Nachamol, guys, let's halt up over here. In the case of Beitza, okay, let me just give to be straight in all of the three cases today. You have Shabbos is Shabbos and Sunday is Yom Tov, just as an example. An egg is born on Shabbos. According to Beis Hillel, you can't touch the egg, noilad. What's the din on Sunday? That's one of the arguments between the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda. The Chachamim hold that Beis Hillel holds that it's Shtei Kedushos. The Chachamim are lenient, and they say, no problem, you can eat it. You can eat it. Forget about on Sunday. No, it was born on Shabbos. Sunday is a separate Kedusha. Rabbi Yehuda holds it's Kedusha Achas, and therefore, it's Kedusha Achas. It's prohibited on Shabbos, Shabbos morning, Shabbos afternoon, the same thing. It's prohibited also on Sunday. Before we go into Gemara, I just want to tell people that the Kedusha Achas, Shtei Kedushas, is really a subject which is relevant to 3 different cases. We are only learning about Shabbos Yom Tov. Don't forget that 2 days Yom Tov in Golus is also a question whether it's Kedusha Achas, Shtei Kedushos. And even if you're going to hold that 2 days of Yom Tov is Shtei Kedushos, Rosh Hashanah might be unique. In where we say, concerning some of the halachas, not all, some of the halachas, it's Yom Arichta, which might be connected to this topic. So we're not talking about 2 days of Yom Tov, just to make it, it's the same idea, but we are talking about Shabbos Yom Tov. And
again, don't we consider Rosh Hashanah as 1 day?
Very good. For many things, for sure it is, but for many things it's not. The biggest proof is, Kevan, we blow the shofar twice. We make Kiddush twice. All right, so it's not so pashut. Even though we say it's 1 day, but it's, you can't daven Shachris once and say, I daven today. All right. But anyways, let's come back over here. Rabbi Yochanan was the youngster in Sipoidi. Rabbi Yochanan paskent like Rabbanan, whether in Beitza, whether over there in the topic that we just mentioned, in Shvius or in Beitza. The elder judge in Sipoidi paskent like Rabbi Yehuda. Now we're going to focus more on Beitza. And we said, and because of that, Rabbi Yochanan moved. So first of all, we want to clarify, we want to discover who is this elder, Amar Rebbe Vam, that also Uvda Kumi Rabbi Yasa. Look what happened. Rabbi Yasa was a student of Rabbi Yochanan. And the story that came to Psak, that came to him, the Shiloh that came to him was not about Shvius. It was about the case of an egg. Numbers like that. Egg was born on Shabbos, then Sunday was Yom Tiv, and someone wanted to know whether they can eat the egg on Yom Tiv. He's a student of Rabbi Yochanan. He was going to paskin like Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan paskins like the Rabbanan. The Rabbanan hold shtei kedushos. However, Kat Shema, when he heard that both Rav, now Rav in itself would not have changed his mind. We always know Rav Rabbi Yochanan. You know, Rav turned out to be the great leader in Surah, in Bavel, and Rabbi Yochanan was ultimately not only the Rav in Tiberia, he was like the Rav Harashi in the whole Holy Land. He was the Rishon LeZion over here. But it wasn't just Rav. Rav and Rabbi Chanina. This is Rabbi Chanina Bar Chama. And this Rabbi Chanina was the Dayan. Both of them, when he found out that both Rav and Rabbi Chanina argue with his teacher Rabbi Yochanan, they paskin b'negeya the egg like Rebbe Yehuda that holds kedusha achas. Ubemele, since it's asar on Shabbos, it's asar on Yom Tiv. So Rabbi Yasa Shiramina, he withdrew. Which it can even mean that he paskined first like Rabbi Yochanan, and when he discovered, he undid his psak. Now that's something very strong. Okay.
What was his taina to redraw?
What was that?
What was his taina to
his reason, Daf Ayin Aleph, his reason to redraw is because it wasn't only his Rebbe against Rav. It was Rabbi Yochanan against Reish Lakish. Now he knows that Rav holds and Rabbi Chanina hold like Rabbi Yehuda, Kedusha Achas. So it became like Rabim Yachid V'Rabim. Let me use words that God should protect me if I'm saying wrong words. If Rabbi Yasser would have been a chassid, I don't think he would have retracted. But he wasn't a chassid. He was a Talmud. And in the world of a Talmud, you have to follow rules. Or maybe Rabbi Chanina was the elder. See, that's the thing. It's very interesting. Rabbi Yochanan moved cities because of that. Because the Rav is the Mara da Asra. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan had a different understanding than him. So Rabbi Yochanan felt he must leave. He must leave.
Why? I don't get that. You don't agree, you leave?
It's amazing, We're speaking about two giants, and each one, in other words, let me answer both questions together. The fact that Rabbi Yochanan moved out of Tzipoidi means Rabbi Yochanan acquiesced to the fact that this Rabbi Chanina, he is the master in Tzipoidi. And he had a different understanding of how halacha should function. If you have a disagreement in yeshiva, it's geschmack. Even better. The more disagreements, the better. When it comes to halacha, there has to be one halacha. Okay, weiter. Now, says the Gemara, the Spalgun, where do we know, from where did we know that Rav and Rabbi Yochanan argued? So he says that Rabbi Yasser heard that he argues. What's amazing is that their opinion, they opined not in the case of an egg. They opined in another case, which is also connected to Shtei Kedushas Kedusha Achas. And what is that? Regarding the following. Shiar Psilam, the remains of a wick. And or. Shiar Medura, the remains of a torch. And or Shiar Shemen, the remains of oil in a lamp. So you have a lamp. Either there's one wick, it's a lamp, or you have many wicks, you have a torch, and you lit it Erev Shabbos. That means when Shabbos came in, Chevra, we call this Muktzah Machmas Isur. Just the category. And if you remember that there's a big rule, and not only is the lamp, anything that's serving the lamp is called a basis, a base to Muktzah, a base that's exclusively a base, or be'ikar a base to Muktzah is Muktzah. Then there's another rule that kiven the iskatzoi bein hashmashos, if something when bein hashmashos of Shabbos comes in as muktzah, it remains muktzah the whole Shabbos. No debate about that. So even after the candle, even after your lighted on the Shabbos table, it got extinguished, after it burnt out, the lighted is muksa the whole Shabbos. We know that. And even if there's a remaining oil, you can't do anything with that oil on Shabbos, it's muksa. Same question. What happens if Matzah Shabbos Sunday is Yom Tiv? So if Shekavo b'Shabbos, they got extinguished on Shabbos, there's a lot of leftover. You can actually reuse it. It burnt out, right after Shabbos came in. Really, normally when a woman or a man lights Shabbos candles, they take in Shabbos. It can happen. It got extinguished. You can't relight it. So now comes Yom Tiv, Matzah Shabbos, which is Yom Tiv. Amachaya, the candles are set up. Could you use it or not? So the question is, Ma'od can be Yom Tiv. Now, what's the question? L'chu'ura, the question is, Shtei Kedushas, Kedusha Achas. Shabbos, it was Muktzah. If it's Kedusha Achas, same thing. So it's Muktzah for Shabbos Yom Tiv. I'll tell you more than that. Lambs, B'chlal, are not Muktzah. It's even more than the egg. See, the egg that's born on Yom Tiv is Noilad on Yom Tiv. The lamb, there's no Muktzah on Yom Tiv. B'chlal.
Muktzah michamas mius, no?
No, Muktzah machmas isur.
I understand. I know that. But I'm saying the lamp.
The lamp for using it for other things would be Muktzah machmas mius. Very good. Whatever the Muktzah is, very good. So now, so in other words, this is really the machlokes Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda argued in Beitza, but we apply it over here. Rav and Abchanina, Terei Hoin Amrin, they said it's asur. Why? Kedusha Achas. Who says Kedusha Achas? Rabbi Yehuda. And the Rabbi Yochanan said Shtei Kedushas. So anyways, that's from where Rabbi Yasef found out that Rav and Rabbi Chanina argue with his teacher, with Rabbi Yochanan. Now we got a problem over here. Problem is, why are we even comparing one case to the other? When l'chu'ura, they're not compatible. Now there's different girsois. Let's go with the version Amar Rebbe Maneh. And he asked this in front of Rabbi Yudan. Then you have a version that it was in the opposite direction. That here, listen to these words. Mo apchala psila gabebeitza. The word apcha means fadreing. Why are you confusing? It's amazing. Like ipcha. So in Yerushalmi, when someone was going, making circles, why are you making circles? Why are you making tumble sauces between one case and the other when it's not a good comparison? And why is it not I'll tell you why it's not a good comparison. Because an egg that's born on Shabbos or born on Yom Tiv, equally noilad on that day, like we mentioned. Even though Masechtas Be'ah begins on Yom Tiv, it's the same thing, Shabbos and Yom Tiv. A week to begin with is not a problem on Yom Tiv. It's not just an issue of Kedusha Achas or Shtei Kedushas. Why would the wick be Asur? It's different. No, it's by Beitza. Clearly, the topic is Kedusha Achas Shtei Kedushas. Let's read inside the Marafulda. Let's read inside the Rashidil Yomamish in middle of the right column. Right, you see it. Ma apchalei l'psiliga bebeitza. Me, who's there? Who's the one that compared one to the other? Shahafach va'arav, that mixed up psila, the din of a wick, with the din of a beitza. Lidamoisan v'haloi damu. They're not compatible. Why? The gabe beitza tamali suram. Right. Look inside. We're going to read the parentheses that e noilda b'yamtiv, e noilda b'Shabbos. Whether the egg came into the world on Shabbos or whether it came into Yom Tiv, in both cases, isur noilad. So it makes sense to say Kedusha Achas. In other words, even Rabbi Yehuda that says Kedusha Achas, you know why he says Kedusha Achas? Because they both share the same problem. If it's born on Shabbos, problem. If it's born on Yom Tiv, problem. So since, of Noilad, so we say B'negeya din Noilad Kedusha Achas. But when it comes to a psila, how can you say Kedusha Achas B'chlal? When it comes to a psila, Umadur B'Shabbos, Only on Shabbos there's a problem. There's absolutely nothing muktzad about the wick, about the oil, about the lamp. Not yakir for muktzah machmas mios, to use it to drink orange juice. No, to use it for a candle. That's what it's made for, and you can reuse it on Yom Tiv. Like if I lit a candle out of Yom Tiv, 2 days Yom Tiv in Golos, if I lit candles on Yom Tiv, and I can use the remnant for the next day of Yom Tiv, it's not a problem. So let me just finish. The moide Rabbi Yehuda leRabbanan, the shari lekula alma. In other words, even the Rabbi Yehuda that says kedusha achas and beitza would be moide that by the case of a wick, it will be mutter. What are we trying to get to? We're trying to get to, how do you know, Bechlal, that Rav, right? I know by Rabbi Yochanan, we said clearly Rabbi Yochanan Paskin like the Rabbanan. But how do you know that the Rav Paskin like the Rabbanan? Because Rav said with Rab Chanina that it's that by the wicked Sasser. Yeah, maybe everyone holds with Rabbi Yehuda and Beitza Kedusha Achas. Maybe. Or even if you hold like Rabbi Yehuda that it's Kedusha Achas, even you should still hold by the Psila that it should be mutter. So there's another issue here. So how can you compare them? So says the Gemara, this is a very important statement. The fact that they compared them means it's compatible. Amalei min man da anan chomai. The fact that we see that Rabbanan midamila, that we did compare one case to the other, hada amra adarabba. From here you see he hada. It's the same thing. So first of all, I love this because the way we approach Torah is not that if it doesn't make sense, they have a problem. If it doesn't make sense, I got a problem. Because what they're saying is sensible. If I'm not chopping it, then I have to realign the way I'm thinking. In other words, by the fact that we made this comparison, even though you have a great argument against it, Muzman Zagin, that it is compatible. And why would it be compatible? So here, just to say the words that we shared in the introduction, I'll tell you why it'll be compatible. You see, guys, like this. If the issue of muksa is not on the gavra, if muksa means the item itself is not allowed to be used on Shabbos, which is what makes it muksa, you're right. The item, wicks, fire, could be used on Yom Tov. However, there's another way of understanding muksa. Muksa is that a person set it out from his mind for it to be used. The person is maktzia it. The default is that what do you have in mind to use? And if you, when Shabbos Yom Tov, when Shabbos came in, if you set it out of your mind, then we can argue if you set it out of your mind, you set it out of your mind.
It's funny that in modern Hebrew, aktsah means to allocate. Totally the opposite.
And in the original, it also means to allocate. The question is to allocate in or to allocate out. In other areas in halacha, actually, muksa means to allocate in. In Shabbos, muchan. Muchan means it's ready to be used. And that's muchan muksa. That's by Hilchas Shabbos. But very good.
Rabbi, if you know a chicken is on a 3-day cycle to give birth to an egg,
yes,
can you make it muchan before Shabbos?
Very good. We learned that in Masechtas Beitza.
We did, I forgot.
And I would not be surprised if you challenged the same logic. Your brain is the same brain. I remember having this conversation because when the egg is inside the hen, it's hen.
Right.
It's part of the hen. Even though it's not fleischiks. That was the issue. Even though it's not fleischiks. So in other words, the egg in the hen, the egg in the world is something that never existed. It's called noilad. Okay. Now that we mentioned the din of Beya, Kedusha Achashtei Kedushas, how we do extend it to the case of the wig, now we're going to extend it to a third case, and that will be the final case. And let me say quickly, whenever, nowadays, Midrabanan, there's something called Tchum Shabbos and Yom Tiv, that I cannot walk beyond 2,000 amma outside my Daladamas or outside my city. People are not that familiar with it because many of us live in cities, so we don't have to deal with Tchum Shabbos, but Tchum Shabbos is a big deal. Now, there will be times that there's a neighboring city, just as an example, to my right, face to the east, and that is going to be 3,000 amas away, and there's a way of getting there. So either physically you walk to a point in between before Shabbos, you make an eidov with your feet, or the way it's generally done, you make an eidov with your food, and you put it in a certain place. Ke'ilu, you took in Shabbos or Yom Tov at that location, and now you measure the 2,000 amas from where your Eruv is. And that many times will solve a challenge, allowing you to go from your village to the neighboring village. There's some great shear happening. There's a great fabrenging happening without the Eruv. It's beyond your tchum. Within the Eruv, you are within 2,000 amas of your food. The other city is within 2,000 amas of the food, and you resolved your problem. Now, don't forget, Chavre, the Eruv, if we're making an Eruv with food, you can put the food over there Friday morning. I don't care when you put the food there. The food has to be there when Ben Hashmashas comes in. And with that nuance, where throughout the whole Bein Hashmashas, it has to be there throughout Bein Hashmashas. What happens? Same issue. There's 2 days, the Shabbos and Yom Tov. I put an Eruv Shabbos. If the Eruv would not have been eaten up by someone's animal, Shalom Al Yisrael, the Eruv was there for Shabbos, the Eruv was there for Yom Tov. What happens is that the Eruv was there Erev Shabbos. But before Bein Hashmashas of Yom Tov comes in, the Eruv was consumed. If we say Kedusha Achas, then I will be allowed, just like the Eruv helped me for Shabbos, it will help me for Yom Tov. If we say Kedushas, then I won't say that, because it's 2 different days of holiness, and there was no Eruv when the second Kedusha came in. So says the Gemara, in the name of 4 elders, it was said, 4, we don't know who they are, but they all paskined that Kol Hanechal Eruv Berishon. In the case that we gave, the Eruv was there Erev Shabbos properly, but someone ate it up, person, animal, it doesn't matter, got burned. He does not have an Eruv anymore. He is bound by where his feet were, like everyone else in the city. In other words, Shtei Kedushos. And then we know that Rav Huna b'Shem Rav, he paskined halacha k'arba zakenim. So that's all consistent, right? Because we're saying that the Rav and Rabbi Yechanan, by Beitza, they paskin like Rabbi Yehuda, who's machmer kedusha achas. By the case of a wick we just had over here, that Rav and Rab Chanina said that you can't use it, kedusha achas. And Eruv also, you can't rely on the Eruv that was there Erev Shabbos for Yom Tov because no, I'm sorry, I take it back. Rav Paskin Shtei Kedushos. Rav Paskin Shtei Kedushos. So now we got a contradiction. That's a contradiction now. It's a stira, right? Because Rav Paskin, by the case of the wick, he paskin Kedusha Achas. How did he paskin Kedusha Achas? By paskining that the wick is Asr on Yom Tov. It's Muksa on Yom Tov. Rav and Rab Chanina said it's Asr. That was the Rav and Rab Chanina that say, like Rabbi Yehuda, that the Beitza, that Beis Hillel will hold, that the egg that came into the world on Shabbos cannot be eaten in Kedusha Achas. And here we're quoting that it wasn't Rav, but Rav Paskins, like the 4 elders, that when a Geya din Eruv Tchumen, we say Shtei Kedushos, and therefore Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis. I got a problem. That's a contradiction. What's a contradiction? Come on, who the Avad Shtei Kedushos. Regarding the Eruv, we just said the one that we did final din. It's to Kedushos. The Eruv has to be there out of Yom Tov. But the Avad by the lamb, he argues the Spalgun. And like we just learned, Shiyari Psila, Shiyari Medura, Shiyari Shemesh, Shabbos Man, Lalikma Yom Tov, and Rav and Rab Chanina Tarvayin Omran, that it's Asr. Why Asr? Because Kedusha Achas, and Rabbi Yechanan Omar, that it's Muter. So we got ourselves a problem, we got ourselves a contradiction. So I want to say the following.
All right, quick question. I'm sorry.
No, before I want to have to hold your thought. I want to say like this. This kasha we had in Beitza. There's a big difference the way the Gemara asks it in Masechtas Beitza and here in the Yerushalmi. The Gemara asks a question in Beitza and the Gemara gives an answer. The Gemara here, B'chachma, asks something a tweak different and there's no answer for this kasha. It's like a checkmate. What's the thing? Guys, we learned 3 dinim. We learned the din of an egg, we learned the din of the wick, and now we learned the din of Eruv. Our Gemara is contradicting it out from what to what? From the din of the Eruv Tchumen to the din of the wick. The Gemara could have asked the same question from the din of an egg. Same stira. Rav said that by the egg, right, you can't have it on Yom Tov. The Gemara in Bavli Beitza, Daf Dalid, asks the question, Benegeya egg. And I'm reading it inside. It's 3 lines in the wide lines in Bavli Beitza, Daf Dalid Amud Aleph. Itmar we learned, Shabbos v'Yom Tov. Shabbos, Yom Tov is Sunday. Rav Omar, Noilda Bazeh Asura Bazeh. Shtei Kedushos. right? Nolda b'zeh, asura b'zeh. Rabbi Yechanan Amar, nolda b'zeh, muteres b'zeh. So asks the Gemara, Nema, that Rav holds Kedusha Achas, right? How can Rav hold Kedusha Achas? Nolda b'zeh, asura b'zeh. How can that be Kedusha Achas when Rav paskins like the four Zikanim? Like we just said by Eruv, that by Eruv, it's not Kedusha Achas. By Eruv, the Eruv has to be there by Ben Hashmashas going into Yom Tov. So the Gemara gives a Gavaldik answer. When Rav said that an egg that's born on Shabbos cannot be eaten on Yom Tov, the Gemara says in Bavli, not because of Kedusha Achas, not because of the din of Hachana de Rabba. Rabba says that Shabbos cannot be Mechin Yom Tov. It's very simple. In other words, how can you eat the egg on Yom Tov? When did the egg come into the world? On Shabbos. So it has nothing to do with Kedusha Achas, Shtei Kedushas. It's a din of Hachana. For something to be allowed to be used either on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, it needed to be muktzad, set aside, muchand, and muchand means it has to be in the world. And if it came into the world on Shabbos or on Yom Tov, you can't use it on the next day if it's Shabbos or Yom Tov. Ein Shabbos mechin l'Yom Tov. Gavaldik. That answer doesn't apply over here. That's the wisdom of the Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi doesn't bring the contradiction of Rav on Rav from Beitza to Tchumen. It brings the contradiction from a wick. By a wick, there's no hachana. See, an egg did not exist. The oil, the shiyari of the shemen, the oil existed. The fact that the candle on Shabbos went out early and you have still enough oil for Yom Tov, that wasn't muchand. It wasn't prepared on Shabbos. The oil you had from a month ago, you had it from before Shabbos. It wasn't fully eaten up on Shabbos, so you have leftovers. Leftovers is not called hachana. When you make food on Yom Tov, you can have the leftovers on the next day, as we all do. Nothing wrong. You're not preparing for it's leftovers. This question has no answer. And I just want to read the bomb. Kevin, I'm going to come back to you in a second. It's okay. Amazing that that the contradiction that we asked before, the wick and the egg, the Gemara repeats it again. Now, this could be a mistake in the print because we just had this before. And the wick and the egg is not the topic of Rab Chizda. Rab Chizda's topic was Eruv Tchumen and the wick. But now the next statement, we just had it before. Amar Rav Manu, Kumin Rab Yudan, Ma Apchal Psila Gava Beitza. Again, he was bothered. Why are you bringing Psila and Beitza? We're talking about that? And the answer is the fact that they brought it together means that it's compatible and you are the one that has to adjust the way you think. The fact that the Chachamim put it together is Araya Hada Amra, he Hada. Yeah, Kevin, I'm ready. What's your issue?
Right, a wick that was burning during Shabbat and it goes out. Can you consider it as a new item because the length of it is shortened? Therefore, no. And even if you were to say that, which we don't, the only reason why it's new, the only Havamina Kevin by the wick, is that a wick that is singed is better than an unsinged wick. And even by there, that's not a correct answer. When it comes to the dinim of Hachana de Rabba. Hachana de Rabba doesn't mean if something was already usable and you made it more usable, that's not called Hachana de Rabba. Hachana de Rabba means that it was unusable, it was inedible, and now you did something on Shabbos and you can't benefit from that on Yom. There's no answer. The Gemara has no answer. Correct.
Okay. Nigmar Asipur. Now we're coming back to our Mishnah. So we had in the Mishnah 3 Tanoim. Yesterday we only learned Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Rabbi Yehuda says Chardal is mutter. The Chachamim hold Kol Asvicha Masurim, meaning we learned Pnei Moshe or the Rashirilio. They argue regarding Chardal. What we were just reminding everyone, all of the plants that the Pedic began with, Mesechtes Pegam and the others, even Lechachamim Svichim are mutter, because they are even more mufkar. Chardal, there was a machlokes, and then we had Rab Shimon who holds that fakert all of the Svichim are mutter. The only one that's asr, the only isur that Rabbanan is Kruv, cabbage, and point well taken, Kavan. There are many cabbages. Maybe something will be clarified. And Rab Shimon gave a reason. Now, we already touched the Gemara when we learned the Mishnah. The words of Rab Shimon was, She'ein kayoytze behem b'yarkas hasada. There is no other vegetables like cabbage. And therefore it's asur. Now, how? How is it distinguished from? How is it differentiated from the other ones? It's not worded in the Mishnah. So the Gemara wants to clarify. So says the Gemara, just because it's different, every vegetable is different. In other words, what difference is there? So explains the Gemara. Rab Chama bar Ukvan, the name of Rabbi Yossi bar Rab Chanina, says that cabbage grows. We're speaking even of svichim, even if you didn't plant it, cabbage grows like the original cabbage, like the mother. It means it looks the same. That's the way we will teach the Gemara. Unlike all the other plants. By all the other plants, if someone planted it biyadayim versus if it's an aftergrowth, Rab Shimon bar Yochai holds, if you look at it, you'll see a difference. Now, like we mentioned, why did the Chachamim say you can't have svichim? No one planted it. What's wrong with it? Why can't you pick it? Because we are afraid that someone will plant it with their hands. They're going to violate shvis, and they're going to claim it grew on its own. Says Rab Shimon that no, for the discernible eye, the only vegetable where one will get away with that is by the cabbage, because they look alike. The other ones don't look alike. And the Gemara elaborates, just because they look just like the mother, that's why it's asur. Yeah, I'm going to about Yitzchak. Kol hayarak iat yochel la'amad. La'amad means you can tell, you can see. Im chadash. Chadash means that someone planted it biyodayim. That's the way we will teach the Gemara. Im yashenu, if it's a sviach, that means that, there was some seeds from the previous year that got blown in the wind, it fell on the ground on the 7th year, and it grew on the 7th year. We're calling it old because it's from the planting was done last year. This is a residual. But and therefore no one will be able to claim innocence, because their guilt, L'Rashbi, who had a good eye, will be clear, evident. But only by cabbage, they look the same. And what are we afraid of? Someone is going to do something prohibited. He's going to plant something. He's going to take it. He's going to want to eat it or sell it. And he's not going to claim, oh, no, this is from last year, that minoi moisei vesi, and no one will know the difference. So that is why the Chachamim said only by cabbage. Now this answers Kevan's question, and that is, he asked, what type of cabbage? Kevan, the type of cabbage, could be many, could be few. The type of cabbage that whether you planted it or whether it's an aftergrowth, they will look exactly the same. They would be just as large, just as juicy, just as everything. And other svichim are not that way. Other svichim, there is something better by the fact that they were cultivated by a human hand. It was placed properly, it was watered properly, something, there's a difference. And now, as we mentioned, the big chiddush today is we're quoting a brisa. This brisa has a novelty. And the novelty is like we mentioned. Now we're talking about a maras ayin issue. That even for those products that we go after shlish, and therefore, if a shlish came in the 6th year, theoretically, you can leave it in the ground and you can pick it on shvius. It's not a shvius product. Midrabanan, for you to be allowed to leave something in the ground, a product of the 6th year, is only if when shvius began, it's hard and dry. If it's soft, then there is a fear that an observer might think it's a product of the 7th year. Says the Brais. And now, based on that, there's an exception. What's the exception? Luf. Doesn't mean it's the only exception, but it's the representative of the exception. Luf is that type of onion. Actually, we learned a lot about the luf. We learned the luf was from the 6th year, from the 7th year, from the 8th. Actually, luf was left in the ground for many years. Is any plant that's regularly left in the ground for a long while, for many years, the bulb keeps on growing, there won't be a marasayin, even if it's soft when the 7th year enters. No one will be chayish. They know that this is something that takes years in the ground. Ein machayven, this is a braisa, la'akoid es haluf bashvis. Like we said, even if it's soft when the 7th year begins, what could you do? Avol manichoy k'may shehu. You can leave it. You can leave it as long as you want. Gewaldig. I'm reading inside the middle of the Mara folder. He has to give the intro. Kol yarkos asur l'kaim b'shvius b'pnei maris ayin shelo yoimru shenizru b'shvius. Avaluf, since darker lias me base gimel shanim ve'en kan maris ayin. It's not that you cannot pick a loof on the 6th year. He's saying that you're not chayiv to. Very good. Let's go weiter. And now it says the Braisa ein mechayven. Oisoi l'shodesh hakinoris bashvis. So you have a artichoke, and it's a 6 years artichoke. Here also says the Braisa, there is no marasayin. No, it's even if it's softish. When the 7th year enters, you don't have to uproot it. Why don't you have to uproot it? Because Bechlal, there's so many svichim, so many of artichokes grow on their own. No one is going to be chayish that you planted it. No, it's going to be a sviach. Oh, so here it's about someone suspecting you of planting it. No one will suspect it that you planted it. Avo, however, mishakev ba'olim, you have to pull the leaves away. Why do you have to pull the leaves away? Because the leaves grow on the 7th year. It's amazing. And therefore the leaves are considered svichim. So you can't use the leaves. However, if it grew after Shvius, in other words, you pulled it away, you left the artichoke in the ground, and it kept on growing leaves. The leaves that grew on the 7th year is also mishum svichim. The leaves that grow on the 8th year is completely mutter. Now we got a challenge over here. The challenge over here is, without the isurei derabanan of svichim, leaves are animal fodder. We already learned that animal fodder is included in Kedusha Shvis. We learned that when it comes to anything that's imbued with Kedusha Shvis, midda oiraisa, lo achla v'lo lahefseid. How can you all of a sudden come here because of a marasayin issue, because of a svichim issue, say you have to uproot it and throw it away? I get it that leaves are not made for human consumption, but oichle behema are included in the dinim of Shvis. And so how can a rabbinic concern trump and get you to violate an Isur Dairaisa? So answers the Gemara, I'll tell you why. When you uproot the leaves, you're talking not allowed to destroy it biyadayim. Elama me'eleim heim avedim. It's amazing. Sheval tasa.
But how? They still connected. How do you
No. You have to cut out. You're leaving the artichoke in the ground. You're cutting out the leaves because of svichim. You're not allowed to destroy it biyadayim. But if you leave greens, greens in my fridge, even in the fridge, at some point it withers away. And that's called causality. You're not doing it directly. You're not doing anything with it. That the Chachamim are allowed to do. And more Gevaldik Amaisa. Let's go. The Chachamim say kol asvichim asurim. The Chachamim argued with Rab Shimon. Now I want you to know how powerful it is. I want to go back to the story that Rabbi Yochanan moved away from Tzipoiri because everyone needed to follow the Dayan's psak, and Rabbi Yochanan had a different understanding. Now listen to what happened. B'chal the Rashbi was very a lot of gevura there, as we have by many Hasidic Rebbes. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai have a avar b'shmitza. He was walking around in the Shemitah here. Listen to this, guys. V'chamos chad malakit shvis, and he saw someone gathering shvis, gathering svichim. You know why that guy was gathering svichim? Because they followed his ruling, right? He said that svichim are only asur by cabbage. Amar lei Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him, "Leis asur v'lav svichim inun." How can you do that? Imagine. So the Amar lei that Yid tells the Rashbi, "V'lav atu matiran." What do you mean? I'm following your psak din. You're the one that said that it's mutter daf ayin beis. Amar lei Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai told him, "Ve'ein chaverai chalukim alai." But don't you know that Chachamim argue with me? In other words, you're not allowed to follow my psak din. You have to follow the Chachamim. And he was so not happy with this Yid. Kara olav. A pasuk in Koheles that poitets gader, one who breaches a fence is yishichenu nachash. You know what happened? V'chein havaslei, and that person was bitten by a snake.
Gee. Oh, wait, the leaves of the that you
Yes.
took out. Can you have the center? Can you eat the that plant? What was it called? The
The
artichoke.
artichoke. So no, one second. Caveman, if you
took out the leaves because you can't.
it's not tzvichem, and yeah, you can eat it.
Okay.
You can eat the artichoke. It's imbued with, if you pick it, it's imbued with kedusha shvis. You can't call it an aftergrowth because it was planted on the 6th year. But the leaves are considered tzvichem. It's amazing. The leaves are considered tzvichem.
Because animals can eat them.
And theoretically,